We are deconstructing the 5 pillars of the Paul Guthrie deception. We just spent a lot of time meticulously dismantling pillar number 1, the 2,200-mile walk points to the Indus Valley only. We demonstrated that the evidence of the terrain and the evidence of the mathematics totally eliminate Mr. Guthrie's proposed route. So we need not spend any more time on Mr. Guthrie's hypothesis. It is totally dismantled. We have demonstrated that it is Mecca, Arabia that fits all of the qualifications as the root of civilization according to our lessons. We are now on pillar number 2. The 9,000 nautical miles point to the Indus Valley only. What is this 9,000 nautical miles of which we speak? Please listen to Mr. Guthrie.
Do you remember a little earlier I mentioned that W.D. Farrakhan traveled 9,000 miles from the root of civilization to North America?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you could talk about that.
Well, in the lessons, he tells us again how we are to measure that distance. And if we use how he said to measure that distance, we'll see that takes us again directly to India.
Yeah, explain that.
Okay. In English lesson number C1, line number 32, it says, well, they wanted to go to their own country, but they could not swim 9,000 miles.
Right.
Swimming is done across water, not across any land. So the distance between America and the root of civilization is a distance of 9,000 miles by water. When we measure the distance by water between America and Mecca, Arabia, we find that the distance does not equal 9,000 miles. So once again, Mecca, Arabia is excluded. It cannot be the root of civilization described in English lesson number C1. On the other hand, when we measure the distance from North America to the Indus Valley region of India, from the eastern seaboard of the United States, across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean Sea, down the Suez Canal, and around the Arabian Sea, we find that the distance by water between America and the Indus Valley region of India equals 9,000 miles, exactly as explained in the lesson. Now we have triangulated the exact geographic location of the country, which the lessons refer to as the root of civilization. This means that no other place, location on the face of the planet Earth is both 2,200 miles by land from the Caucasus Mountains and at the same time 9,000 miles by water from North America. No other location on the face of the planet Earth fits this description other than India.
No other place on the face of this earth but India. Mr. Guthrie wants us to accept his proposal that when the lessons speak of the slaves or former slaves here in America desiring to return home, but were unable to because they could not swim the 9,000 miles from where they were, North America, back to their country, not city, it's important, to their country, 9,000 miles. Mr. Guthrie says that number, 9,000 miles, excludes Arabia. But of course, he does not give us any mathematics with sensing a pattern. He doesn't give us any mathematics that would exclude Arabia. And back to remember when we dealt with the first pillar of the Paul Guthrie deception, the 2,200 mile deception. Mr. Guthrie threw it out there that Mecca, Arabia could not be the location because Mecca, Arabia is only 1,500 miles or less than 1,500 miles from the Caucasus Mountains. He provided no evidence whatsoever. He just threw that out there in hope enough the uncritical minds of his listeners will grab onto it and take it as fact. Well, I think we've demonstrated why he did not present any facts to back it up, because there are no facts to back it up. Mecca, Arabia is 2,200 foot miles from the Caucasus Mountains. But I return to that only to make this point again. Mr. Guthrie throws statements out there like Mecca, Arabia is excluded because it's not 9,000 miles from North America. He doesn't give us any mathematics. He doesn't give us any data at all. His modus operandi is to throw claims out there and let it germinate in fertile minds, i.e. uncritical minds. But what are the facts? I call this the 9,000 mile magic trick of Mr. Guthrie. Now, I call it a magic trick really with reference to a follow-up video Mr. Guthrie conducted called Trial by Math, in which he used computer-generated magic. We're going to unpack that. But let's get at this 9,000 miles and see if what Mr. Guthrie claims is true, that Mecca, Arabia, or Arabia is excluded from consideration of this 9,000 mile swim, and if Mr. Guthrie is right that no place on earth other than his preferred spot in India matches this 9,000 mile nautical distance. And nautical is important because, and Mr. Guthrie emphasizes, and rightly so, they could not swim 9,000 miles. So that tells us what type of miles we're looking for. We're looking for nautical miles. If we are to determine the distance that will be swam, that distance will be in miles, but it will be in nautical miles. Do we have any data on nautical miles? Indeed, we do. If you go to ports.com, the distance between the port of Houston in North America, in Texas, the distance between the port of Houston and the port of Jizan is almost, in Arabia, is almost exactly 8,941 nautical miles, 9,000 miles. Now, let's quote the lesson, the statement right. There is no need to look for Mecca or to calculate from Mecca. The lesson said they wanted to return to their country, not their city. So we treat the country of Arabia. And from Port Houston in North America to the port of Jizan in the country of Arabia, that's almost exactly 9,000 nautical miles. But Mr. Guthrie says he dismisses it with no demonstration that Mecca is excluded. No, Mecca is not excluded. From Houston to the port of Jizan in Arabia, that's almost 9,000 miles. But we can go any further because part of why I call this the 9,000 mile magic trick, I've also called this Mr. Guthrie's 9,000 mile game, because there can be and seems to be a profound arbitrariness with pinpointing the starting points and ending points. Right. In Mr. Guthrie's trial by mathematics, he randomly chose as the starting point in North America, I believe, a location in North Carolina. Well, that's fine. The reality is, anywhere in North America, I guess, could be an appropriate starting point, and you will get different mathematics depending on where you start in North America and where you want to start in Arabia or in India. Now, with Mr. Guthrie, his preferred point in India is always Karachi, Pakistan. Okay. If we start from the port of Houston in North America to the port of Jizan in Saudi Arabia, that's 9,000 nautical miles, or to be exact, 8,941. But to be fair, port of Houston, Texas, it seems almost arbitrary, right? But in fairness, we can pick any place in this North America. And Mr. Guthrie didn't pick Port of Houston. I just did, but I concede it's quite arbitrary. Is there a less arbitrary possibility? Now let's see. English C lesson number 1 was written in 1934, as I understand it, which is when Master Farrakhan Muhammad was in Detroit, Michigan. Might the point of reference be from Detroit to the home country? Might he been speaking from his personal point of reference when he said they cannot swim 9,000 miles? Well, it's a possibility. I don't say that I can prove that, but indulge me out of the spirit of kindness. You owe me one. indulge me. Just say, what would, if Detroit, where the lesson was written, where Master Farrakhan Muhammad was at the time of the lesson, what if Detroit was a point of origin for the 9,000 nautical mile journey to the home country? What would that number be? Well, we got it right here. That number will be 8,995 nautical miles. 9,000 nautical miles. So the claim that Arabia is excluded, the reason no evidence was offered is because that claim is false. You can get in from multiple locations in North America a 9,000 nautical mile journey from North America to the Arabian Peninsula. And what's more, well, because Mr. Guthrie doesn't use nautical miles in his reconstruction, trial by mathematics. He uses miles, but he emphasizes that their swimming is by water. So we need nautical miles. What does the mathematics say? Mr. Guthrie wants to take us from North America to Karachi, Pakistan. Okay. If we start in Detroit, where Master Farrakhan Muhammad was, when he wrote that lesson and said his people cannot swim 9,000 miles from the port of Detroit to the port of Karachi, Mr. Guthrie's fave place, do we find 9,000 nautical miles? Absolutely not. We find nearly 12,000 nautical miles, or to be exact, 1,000 or 11,768 miles. So from the port of Detroit to Arabia, 9,000 nautical miles. From the port of Detroit to Karachi, Pakistan, 12,000 nautical miles. I think we don't have to belabor the point too much. We can say that the second pillar of the Paul Guthrie deception crumbles. The 9,000 nautical miles point to the Indus Valley only. That pillar crumbles. The 9,000 nautical miles can very well point not just to North America, multiple points in North America to Arabia, but specifically to the point where Master Farrakhan Muhammad was located when he uttered those words, the city of Detroit. The third pillar of the Paul Guthrie deception. Please listen to Mr. Guthrie.
Well, look at the name Mecca. Everybody already knows about the city of Mecca on the Arabian Peninsula. But ancient India was in ancient times known by a name very similar to Mecca. It's called the Indus Valley Civilization. That civilization, which the lessons correctly call the root of civilization in Asia, is located in the western part of India. The exact same place of India where all the names come from. Usman, Shah, all of the names come from, and everything else comes from the same part of India. In ancient times, the Indus Valley civilization was known as Mleccha, M-L-E-C-C-H-A. Mleccha, you can hear the name in there, Mecca in there. Mleccha is the modern way of pronouncing, it's the more Aryanized or Indo-European way of pronouncing a very old name. The people of that civilization in ancient India, they called their civilization Mlecha. The people who lived near them, they called that part of India Mlecha. Archaeologists tell us that even as far away as Sumer, it was known as Mlecha. India was called Mlecha.
So you're saying that Mlecha was one of the original names of the root of civilization on the continent of Asia.
Yes, that's what they called it.
In ancient times, Mr. Guthrie says, the Indus Valley civilization was known as Mlecha. He says further, the people of that civilization of ancient India, the Indus Valley people themselves, they called their civilization Mlecha. He says further, quote, archaeologists tell us that even as far as Sumer is ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeologists tell us that even as far as Sumer, it was known as Mlecha, end quote. I would imagine that any Indologist or scholar studying ancient India, or any Sumerologist, scholar studying ancient Sumer, I imagine they would cringe upon hearing those words from Mr. Guthrie, because such claims are blatant betrayal of the facts of history and of linguistics. There is no record of an indigenous Indus Valley version of Mlecha. There is no record of a Sumerian version of Mlecha. Mlecha is a Sanskrit term that has the exact opposite sense than that which Mr. Guthrie is trying to attribute to it. Mlecha is not a toponym, meaning it is not a designation for a holy city or an unholy city or any geographical location, either in India or anywhere else on the globe. Rather, Mlecha has a specifically linguistic reference with cultural connotations. It was an Aryan term of insult. The Aryans were the whites who invaded the Black Indus Valley and warred with the black people of the Indus Valley civilization for nearly 500 years, ultimately defeating them and enslaving them. That's the Aryans. Mlecha is an Aryan term of insult of their black enemies of the Indus Valley and meant stranger of ill-pronounced language, as well as foreign, non-Aryan, barbarian. In cognate languages, the word carries meanings such as savage and dirty, descriptions which the invading whites had in mind when they called their black enemies Mlecha. How Mr. Guthrie turns this term of racist insult into an indigenous toponym for a holy city is quite head-scratching. It has nothing at all to do with the Arabic toponym Mecca. If the Aryan derogatory term Mlecha is an Aryan corruption of an indigenous Indus Valley term, that possible term, as proposed by scholars, has no relation whatsoever to the Arabic Mecca. Scholars suggest that among the possible predecessors of the Aryan term Mlecha is the Dravidian. Dravidians are the blacks that constituted the Indus Valley civilization, as scholars believe. Scholars suggest that among the possible predecessors of the Aryan term Mletcha is the Dravidian term Mel-u-Akam or Mel-uku, and these would be related to the actual Sumerian term used to describe the Indus Valley, Meluka, Mel-uk-ka, and there is no etymological or phonological relationship with the Arabian Mecca. Mel-u-Akam ain't Mecca. Mel-uku ain't Mecca. Mel-uk-ka is not Mecca. No one would mistake these terms for cognate or related terms, except, of course, Mr. Guthrie. Thus, Mr. Guthrie's claims that in ancient times the Indus Valley civilization was known as Mletcha, or that, quote, the people of that civilization of ancient India, they called their civilization Mecha, that's false. The people never referred to themselves or their civilization as Mecha. In fact, no one referred to that civilization as Mletcha. The Aryans referred to the people, the black people, as Mletcha, meaning they were barbarians who spoke an ill-pronounced language. It was not a name of a city or civilization. It was a racial term of insult from the Aryans to the black people. And the black people never referred to themselves as Mletcha, and they did not refer to their civilization as Mletcha. In this statement, archaeologists tell us that even as far as Sumer, it was known as Mletcha. Sumer never referred to the Indus Valley as Mletcha. Sumer referred to the Indus Valley as Meluka, Meluka, not Mletcha. Melukhkha, Mulukha. That is what the Sumerians called the Indus Valley civilization, not Mletcha. And you can get MECCA out of Melukhkha, because the Sumerian Mel-uk-ka is not the Arabic Mecca. All of these claims by Mr. Guthrie are demonstrably false. And so another pillar of his claim that the supreme wisdom's Mecca refers not to the Arabian holy city, but to a non-existent Indian city that Mr. Guthrie completely conjured up through an abusive manipulation of the facts, crumbles under the weight of those facts. So the Mecca that the supreme wisdom refers to could only be the one holy city Mecca that history knows in Arabia, just as the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches from his teacher, Master Farrakhan Muhammad. There never was a holy city, Mletcha, in ancient India. That very combination of terms, holy city and Mletcha, is laughable. In addition, it is the one and only Arabian Mecca that is both 2,200 miles by foot from the Caucasus Mountains and 9,000 nautical miles from points in North America. Thus, the third pillar of the Paul Guthrie deception crumbles. Footnote. But is Arabia in the Far East and bordered by the Indian Ocean on the south? Absolutely, it is. Mr. Guthrie makes hay with this description in our lessons. that Arabia is in the Far East. Mr. Guthrie does not here suggest that even though this lesson is described by Master Farrakhan Muhammad as being nearly correct, so there was some level of incorrectness somewhere in the lesson, in that particular lesson. Mr. Guthrie says Arabia is not in the Far East, Arabia is in the Middle East. And Arabia isn't bordered on the Indian Ocean on the south, because Yemen and Oman are south of Arabia, and what's more, it's the Arabian Sea, not the Indian Ocean, that borders. Was this part of the lesson incorrect? I doubt it. Despite Mr. Guthrie's insistence, why, Brother Wesley, how can you say that? Mr. Guthrie's argument seemed pretty straightforward. It's not the Far East, it's the Middle East. It's not bordered by the Indian Ocean, it's bordered by the Arabian Sea. Well, not so fast. One mistake that Mr. Guthrie makes. First, the Arabia that was our country is the Arabian Peninsula. The nation states of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, those are artificial boundaries that the white man imposed on an area that we called Arabia. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us Arabia was the name that we, the original man, the original inhabitants of that land, applied not to Saudi Arabia, the nation state, but to the Arabian Peninsula. That's Arabia. That's our home. So we are not, and certainly Master Farrakhan Muhammad, the Savior, was not bound by the geopolitical tinkerings of the Western powers who created these nation states, who determined that Yemen would be separated from Saudi Arabia. That's one. That's point number one. Point number two, is it bordered? So we grant that we aren't bound by these artificial nation state boundaries, and because specifically the black man described, before the coming of the white man, described that area as Arabia. That's our name. That's not their name for that area. It's our name for that area. Granted, say you grant me that point. Still, you say, the lesson says it's bordered on the south by the Indian Ocean. But the map says it's bordered on the south by the Arabian Sea. Oh, man. We must do better, dear people. We must do better. I almost feel bad dignifying this particular point because we should know better. What's the difference between Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea? We learned Arabian Sea is only a part of the Indian Ocean. that is located between the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian subcontinent. It lies on the southwest part of the Indian Ocean. Did you get that? The Arabian Sea is part of the Indian Ocean. They are not distinct. So the lesson is correct. Arabia, our Arabia, is bordered on the south by the Indian Ocean. That's a fact. Well, why does it say in the Far East? It's in the Middle East. Somebody was wrong. Yes, the white man was wrong. Because the white man named that area the Middle East. I do not believe that the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad's description here of Arabia as being in the Far East is to be considered an error in this lesson. Why do I say that? If you look at this 1953 actual facts, a lesson that was passed out in the temples in 1953 up to and maybe past 1953, but this was written in 1953. Lesson passed out in the temple. One of the actual facts asked the question, where is Egypt? And the answer, in the Far East. Not only is Arabia in the Far East, but Egypt is in the Far East. So that wasn't describing Arabia as being in the Far East wasn't a 1934 era, because as late as 1953, it was the teaching in the mosque that even Egypt is in the Far East. How are we to understand that? Well, really quite simple. See, there's a difference between Asiatic geography. By Asiatic, I mean the black man's geography, because we call this whole planet Asia, and we call that peninsula Arabia. So there's a difference between Asiatic geography and Western geography, and one of the fundamental differences is the point of reference. So according to European cartography, or the making of maps, the point of reference is flipped in relation to the point of reference from the perspective of Asiatic cartography, how we wrote the map of our planet, according to how we drew up the map of our planet. Africa is East Asia. Africa and Europe is West Asia. The point of reference is very different. Arabia and Egypt is in the east, just as Africa is in the east. So the point of reference that divided the world between east and west, according to Asiatic cartography, has Arabia, Egypt, and Africa in general, because as we documented in our book, Black Arabia and the African Origin of Islam, the Arabian Peninsula is Northeast Africa. It's a part of Africa. So Africa is east. Europe is west. So these descriptions of Arabia and Egypt in the Far East is based on the specific point of reference, the central point that is acknowledged by Asiatic cartography, which is very different from Western cartography. So it's important that we don't impose. The point is, it is not proper to approach these lessons, which throughout the lessons, the Asiatic cartography is used. It's inappropriate to impose Western cartography or the Western view of the hemispheres on these lessons when the lessons themselves give a different perspective of the hemispheres. So Arabia, like Egypt, can be in the Far East, depending on where Asiatic cartography places the central point of reference. So the lesson that Arabia is in the Far East and bordered on the Indian Ocean in the South stands true. There is no need to migrate the root of civilization out of Arabia into India, which you say is because Western cartography says India is in the Far East, but Asiatic cartography says Africa is in the East, and India is going towards the West. Asiatic cartography versus Western cartography.